All right, we should have done this before. Vinnu, how do you say your last name?
Deshetty.
Deshetty. Okay, I knew. Okay. All right, I'm going to go 3, 2, 1. Hey everyone, welcome back to Resilient Events Podcast. My name's Marissa. You see John, and we have a guest with us today, and I'm excited to talk about what she's doing with her new business. So I know she's probably not talked too much about it. So happy that she's here. We saw each other at IMEX in Vegas and previously earlier this year in DC. So I'm happy to have you, Vinnu Deshetty, and your business is Event ROI Coach. Welcome.
Yes, very excited. Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
Yes. Happy to be here with you virtually. And John, again, always a pleasure to record with you. So
Happy to be back. It's been too
I
long.
see you get a new background.
I did, yeah. It's not as good as Vinnu's, though. I was commenting on it earlier. I like the close shells. You can do so much with it.
Awesome. So let's jump right in. We're talking about the role of data in events, and I think we're all kind of thinking about it when we are producing, putting on, creating content for events, or planning the entire event. And sometimes the data is there, but no one knows what to do. So we're going to talk all about that. So, Vinnu, why don't you give us a little background of your business and then go into the role of data of events and how that is currently in our landscape?
Sure. Well, I've been a meeting planner for almost 30 years, and I have seen it all from when it comes to technology and data. And honestly, I'm an accidental techie. I had a meeting agency, was an 8A, working with a lot of government agencies. And I had agencies coming to me saying, we just need better tech. And part of that, better event tech. And part of that was really understanding what was the data that they were capturing, how should it be organized. And I got obsessed with the data, because it wasn't only about what they were using the data to, how to collect it, but actually what they were going to do with it. And it just kind of evolved into this career now where I can really focus about not only, again, I look at the tech part of it, but actually taking what we're collecting and making it into something that's useful. And I know data can be kind of intimidating. It can be overwhelming. So when I go around speaking and teaching about data, I try to keep it simple. Let's focus on what's important. Let's focus on what we can handle, because our jobs are stressful as it is. Let's figure out how we can use it to help us.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say that, when it comes to like the tech part or the data, they have all this information, but they're so stuck on, all the different tasks that need to be done that it becomes something that like, oh, it's something we look, or maybe they just look at like testimonial feedback, right? Or they're not looking at like different data points. So can you give us an idea of what data points that you would look at as an event ROI coach, and how you would work with the planners to identify those?
And actually I ask a question back, is what's important. I like to reverse engineer it, because for every organization it's a little bit different. And what I really try to focus on is not just how the data impacts that actual event, but how the data impacts the event that impacts the organization. So if you're a business going to a trade show and you're a trade show organizer, your job is to collect leads, right? Put on a great booth, activation, and you attract people. And typically we measure how many people came to the booth. But what we should really be measuring is how many of those people end up in meetings, how many end up in demos, how many end up back, what's that conversion rate to actual sales and revenue? We always see, I think a lot of business leaders, especially CFOs, look at trade shows and events as a cost center. Oh, that money's just shot. We got to spend it, but it's always going to cost. So it's easy to cut out of a budget. But once you tie the event outcomes to the business outcomes, then it becomes a lot harder to cut, and it shows the value of those events. So I always ask the questions back, don't go beyond just how many people are you attracting, and really look at what that conversion means to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much just those raw numbers, it's like the follow through numbers as well, and kind of tying it together so you have proof of ROI instead of just marketing people making great trade show booths and counting heads.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
I also think that, like, in addition, I think people think that they see trade shows or any type of an event as new business, like conversions. So you had, 90% of the people were new, or you're a new product or a new service. And what if you're an existing product and you're kind of, stale, and you just decide, we have a big enough portfolio, we don't need to go to these events, but you're not counting the hugs, the handshakes, the smiles, like all of those things that are bringing people back to why they work with that company. And I think that a lot of people miss that retention part
Right.
of the ROI when you're going to an event, and putting that into the list of data points that are your, what's successful and what's not.
And let's be honest, right? Like, how many companies actually host a booth and they close the sale on the spot, right?
Right.
It's very rare. And it's
Yeah.
how often is it that only one event is what is, you can trace it back and say someone bought something because they were at that booth. It typically is multiple touch points, right? It involves several people, several different departments. So if you're able to track that information and be able to show that, you can like predict your pipeline even better, right? You can go back and say, okay, I've only touched this person one time. I know in my traditional sales cycle, I have to touch somebody 10 times before they close. Well, then at least you know where they live in that timeline, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Can you tell us a specific example or conversation you had with like an event tech company or a supplier where they were, the ROI was like really important, and you changed their mind in how they envisioned ROI?
Well, I actually did a training workshop for a Fortune 100 company, and they use a very popular registration system that's integrated in with Salesforce, and beautiful dashboards, huge event teams. And when we sat down and brought the teams together and separated them out into little workable groups, and we started talking about what data was important to each person in the room, it was really interesting to see how much data that they wanted, how much data they had access to, and how much data they didn't know they actually had access to, right? So I think those conversations is very, I mean, that's happening at a Fortune 100 company. It's happening everywhere, right? It doesn't matter what size you are. And it's kind of a culture, right? Data is not something that we often share, whether it's because of technology or just how we have siloed our departments. But to be able to have that conversation with different departments and have their eyes open and be able to like, oh my gosh, this person needs this information. I can be helpful to them. And they've just helped me do more. And we can collaborate and be even more profitable in our experience for the company. I mean, that just says volumes. And all it took was a 1 hour workshop just to open up those eyes, right? It's impactful, and it makes me feel like there's so much that we have to uncover in the world. So it's really untapped resources that we're tapping into here. It's like renewable energy.
I'm super curious. I've definitely heard a lot of people ask for a lot of different types of data, etc. What's your experience with like the follow through on that? Like sometimes people say they want stuff, but they just want to have it, but like their actual ability to spend time acting on it, looking at it, using it, that doesn't actually follow through a lot of the time. What are your thoughts there?
Spot on. So I actually, and part of my journey to get here is I once worked for a company where the CEO, he was a new CEO, and he says, we spent $5 million on trade shows and I have nothing to show for it. So before I cut your budget, I need you to create this process where we have visibility into all of that data. And I want this gorgeous Salesforce dashboard. I said,
I've heard that
are you
before.
sure? I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I have to do the dashboard for me just to figure out where we are. So throughout this process, we get to a point where there's a great dashboard. It gets automatically sent to him every week. And this was kind of my first kind of inkling, like, oh, he's not looking at it. And he'd still stop by my desk and be like, okay, so what's our revenue? And I'm like, well, it's in that report that you got. Why are you asking me? He goes, oh, I don't look at it. I said, okay. So we need to do a next step. And actually, that next step before it even got to him was that dashboard helped me as the internal stakeholder to kind of see where we are and what we needed to improve on. So we took from going from zero visibility to having visibility, but now trying to figure out what those insights are and taking action. So then I would literally babysit leads. I would take a booth lead and watch it go through the sales cycle. And I would
Yeah.
even go to the vice president of sales and say, hey, you got 100 leads from this show and nobody's touched them. And then we, after a lot of painful arguments and fights and pointing of fingers, we got to a point where that wasn't the case. And then we were able to go to the CEO, and instead of giving this dashboard, just saying our events have generated whatever it was, $15 million in revenue. That's all he
There you
cared
go.
about.
Yeah,
So
that's his dashboard.
that was his dashboard. That's all he wanted to know, right? So a lot of what I talk about as well is the art of storytelling with data, is like trying to figure out who you're telling that story to, what are they interested in, and also communicating that in a way that they understand, right? Like a dashboard is great for an event organizer that needs to have a landscape of what's happening, how many registered, how many didn't show. But does the C-suite really care about that? No, they want to know what those insights are and what those actions are, right?
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that brings up a point. I think a lot of people, and what I'm seeing, my background's in marketing, and I'm definitely more like in the event side now, but I know how I feel when I'm at an event and what would make me, if I had unlimited budget, what would make me actually close sale or like build relationship. Is there, I want to talk a little bit about data while you're at an event and what technology or what strategies behind data in a live setting is there, and how do we, talk about that with people in terms of this is also important. It's not registrations and testimonials, it's the actual event. And how do you measure that?
There is so much technology that's coming out, right? That's whether it's a wearable, whether it's technology cameras, collecting anonymous data, right? In terms of like, what is the insights that they can get from facial recognitions? What's the intent of people? Like if they're standing at a booth, are they happy? Are they sad? Are they interested? Or even like on a webinar, right? Got now the technology that can actually track whether people are bored or engaged. Like those are definite data points, right? Even before that happened, we started to see a lot of geospatial kind of data of like, where are people, just the hot spots on a floor, what sessions are they going to, or what festival, concerts, entertainment are they going to, having that data. So there's so much that's possible now. And I think also with AI, I know there's fear of AI here, but in the setting when you are getting a lot of that data, but being able to take like that sentiment and correlate many different data points together, having that AI kind of tell you some of those insights so you don't have to figure it out yourself. I mean, you have to know enough to know if AI is lying to you or not.
Right. Yeah.
But it's possible, right? And I think the geospatial, the facial recognition in terms of like intent, I think intent is really where the future is, of trying to figure out how do people feel, what do they want to buy, how do you message to them? I think all of that's going to be really critical as we go forward. That's a differentiator going forward.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll start making the last day of these events like end at 12 p.m. because, I'm sure engagement goes way down at the end. That's what I see.
I think that's great. Now right? You're not just guessing from like going in and remember the days you'd have the counter and you go into a session room and you count how many people and you write it on a piece of paper. And then somebody at the end of the conference, like a week later, is tallying those up, entering it into a spreadsheet and trying to calculate that. You don't have to do that anymore. Like if you've got a wearable and you're tracking like, okay, this session is filled. And this session wasn't. So that gives you some indication of interest. But also now you've got this facial recognition and it's telling you based on people's reactions and clapping and if they looked happy or they look sad, like how are they engaged in that? That's that's a huge telltale, right? You don't have to wait for a survey response to come back. And a survey that's only going out to, you go send it out to everybody, but you're not getting the responses, right?
I do my best to respond to those because I know it's important.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate you in the data world.
John, do you have something specific about during the event or anything that piqued your
I'm
interest?
interested just like, during the event, like what do you think is like the what do you think is the what's new and like obvious and something that people should know but like they don't know right now? Like what do you think is like the most aha kind of thing you've had in the last little while that like you can't believe other people aren't kind of thinking about or talking about?
That's an interesting question because there's, like it's in the moment, right? And I think it's just, I think the value of educating attendees on how to use technology that you have available.
Yeah.
I think it's very basic as that in terms of, I think a lot of times we launch mobile apps, we launch websites and whatnot, but what we don't think about is, are those effective tools? Like, are you on site and struggling? Are your attendees struggling on site to find what they need? And then how do you address that, right? Is that a tech problem or is it a content problem or is it just having resources to help people? Because I think the engagement someone has with the tech and with that's associated with an event, if they're not happy with it from the get-go, you're going to see a drop in usage, right? A drop in engagement. And if that's what you're using to measure success,
Right.
and people aren't able to use it, then you don't really know, right? And I think that's something that I think we need to think more of. But then again, I'm also very cognizant that we're asking event planners to do more, especially on the day of an event, right? Like, that's crazy talk. That's just, and so, I think as technology becomes more advanced and we use more of it, we also have to be more cognitive of the resources we give planners to use the tech, to implement tech. Like, what does that look like? Because what's happening in the event tech industry a lot, especially with SaaS platforms, you're seeing that they only want to provide the software end of it. And that's honestly their business line, right? They just want to provide tech. Going beyond that with customer service, you really have to determine what is it that your tech provider is not providing and what is it that is your responsibility as an event organizer? What do you need to do? And if you can't do it yourself, then to have the thought process of who can help me? Is it someone else on my team or do I need to bring in an expert to do it? And I think I'm seeing a lot of people a lot of new companies coming out of the industry, especially independent planners that are offering this service, right? So let's tap into those people, and especially if they do it well, right? Why not tap into them and have that help and make our lives easier on site, right?
Yeah, that would be a really big unlock to get. I think some reports I've read in the past, I think it's more than 30% of people never download an event app, even if it's like they're going to a 5-day event and they've paid $1,000 to be there and they never download it. And so how good can your data, how good can your be if you're missing at least 30% of the people? And then you're not even talking about who didn't even use it once they downloaded it. And so maybe you're only getting half. So yeah, the humans, they're always the weakest link.
Yeah,
well,
do more with less budget and learn everything, right?
Well, I have to say, I recently went to a conference and I consider myself tech savvy. I mean, this is what I do. I couldn't download the app and I couldn't use it. I was relying on, okay, I'm just going to feel my way through this event. And I left feeling like I was missing something, right? And that's not what you want your attendees to ever feel, right? So how do you also juggle the balance between having, making sure people engage in life, but also if you're providing them this tool that you're asking them to use a lot of, making sure that that's, there's that engagement with it.
Right.
Yeah, we could probably have a whole podcast on horror stories of
it
what
is Halloween,
went wrong.
right?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, it's a perfect time. Dang, we could have renamed this episode.
Yeah. And anything can go wrong with tech, right? Like that's just the nature of the business. Bugs are to be happen, internet goes down, people's phones mess up. Like there's so many sources, but to actually go through the thought process of what's my backup plan? How do I troubleshoot this? I think has to be part of the thought process of going forward.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. Once we had a client that we were doing, it was one of our very first hybrid events post-pandemic, and I was helping training the staff on site on how to do a hybrid event. And the client comes to me, oh my God, no one can get into the system. All the passwords aren't working. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I pull up my phone. I'm looking, I'm like, there are like thousands of people on this app. And I'm like, I don't know where the problem is. I talk to my guys. They're like, yeah, there's no problem. So I go back to client. I'm like, how many people are complaining? She goes, one. I said, is this a board member? She goes, yes. I said, is he very opinionated? She goes, yes. I said, okay, tell you what, I'm here. So let me go to him personally and help him out. That's not sustainable, right? Like that's not scalable to do, but also to put it in perspective, right? It's not always like the reaction has to be a little bit more about fact finding and figuring, is it a human element or a tech element?
Right. Right. And that would factor into if you took that as the app isn't working or the tech's not working, then your ROI is like, we just invested all this money in this app and it doesn't work based on one person's opinion. So that's not good.
Well, it's just like survey data, right? Like you send out a survey, and if you get 3% to actually respond to it, how valid are those results?
And generally, except for Marissa, as discussed earlier, the most likely people to always respond are the people who are upset and have something kind of poor to say, right? So
yeah.
So the lesson learned: always have Marissa at your event so she can
exactly have at least one good review.
Yeah. It's with anything online, any reviews, you always take it with a grain of salt, right? But that's why I try to overcompensate for the people that want to complain, especially if it was a good experience.
And, it's very easy for us to complain about people not completing surveys, right? Mm-hmm. But I think we also need to look about how do we communicate that these surveys are important to the organization. Mm-hmm. And talk about, and I'm a big believer, if you're going to send out a survey, tell people how you're going to use it and how it makes an impact. Mm-hmm. Tell that value proposition, but also look at the medium that you're sending it out in. I know some people will tie it to a session, like you can't get credit for that session unless you fill out the survey. Then you got to think, are they rushing through it or are they really giving you good feedback? Like it's really something that you just can't just roll out. It's something you got to think about.
It sounds like every event is different, right?
No way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of all-in-one box solutions that will say this is what you get and this is how we're going to provide our services, but not everyone has the same required business outcomes or the data points they want. Yeah, so what would be the first step that like a smaller organization could do in terms of prioritizing data and events? Like how would you help?
Don't laugh, but I always say breathe. The first step is just to take a hot minute, right? Like just be intentful about making this a priority, or not even a priority, but a mission, right? Take it on and put time aside where you think about, what do I want to do? And don't think about what do I want to collect? Think about what are your KPIs, what key performance indicators, what are your goals? Tie it back to the organization and reverse engineer it, right? Like if your goal is to increase sales, okay, what data do you need to support that? And make those goals measurable so you have something to attain to, but just work backwards. And then there's a lot of conversation in the industry about, what should be on your reg form. Should it be just your name and email address, or do you ask 10 pages of questions, right? And I think that's going to guide what information you collect and when. Should it be in a registration form, or is it when you log into your platform or a membership database, whatever?
I would say name, email, and favorite color. I don't know. Very simple. Get me to pay right away. That's all I need.
Get them to pay right away. And then collect more as you go. Strategically collect more as you go if it's possible. Yeah.
I wouldn't look at an app. I'm super techie like you, Vinnu, but I don't really look at apps until like 2 days before, maybe, even if I'm looking forward to the event, because I don't want to get overwhelmed with all the other apps that are in my life, So it's like, people think, oh, we don't have any data, we don't have any insight, but it's like, you got to consider customer behavior. And hopefully with the introduction of AI and really someone human looking at all the data can really give us some good insights into trends.
But I'd like to challenge you on that, though.
Okay.
Right? So the apps that are, since you're only going in 2 days early, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no value. Those apps aren't providing you value to go in any earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just fine. Now, if there was an app, like in a program, right? It's not just the app, it's the program. If they gave you a reason to go in earlier, then you might go in earlier, right?
Right.
Right now, I think the way most organizations that are using technology, it's just to get you at the event, right? But now you see a lot of organizations trying to create community, trying to create buzz beforehand. And if you do that and do it well, you could have people engaged before the event. I'm a big believer in that. I think that if you do some, depending on the event too, right? But even with my sales hat on, I'm talking to people before they get to the event.
Right.
So when they get to the event, they already know who I am, and we're just having a good time at the event. We're creating that bond and that relationship. So again, it's possible. Are we there yet? No, but again, it's capacity, resources, right? I think we will get there. And to your point, like with AI and tech, it'll help us do that, right?
Mm-hmm. No, you bring up a good point. I think, when you have already a good rapport with like the people that you're intending to meet at an event, or you have the ability to connect online, or you have a good, communication channel with them already, that the app is really kind of like a side thing. But when you're not doing that, it is important to have something to, like you said, build community and get people engaged and excited. And there's many different ways, and I'm sure we can have a whole nother episode on what that is.
I'm super curious. John. What is the CTA that we could send Marissa before an event that would get her to register at least like 3 days before, 5 days before? Like what could we do to pull Marissa in?
Well, I'm already registered. It's more using the app.
Right.
Yeah. So what would that be? Like what would make you want to be on an app? Like, is it content? Is it education? Connection to people?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm pretty... Well, it's hard for me because I don't really have structure anymore when I go to events. I like to let things happen, right? Like, so a flow, like I have certain intentions holistically, let conversations happen, or have one opening question that I want to ask people, right? And these are all things that I've worked on just as a professional. If I was like really wanting to go in, I think maybe like a matchmaking, I think they probably have that, like and it needs some better work, I think, because I was getting matched with people that I potentially needed to meet at a most recent event, and I didn't care to meet them, really. I mean, I didn't...
dating app.
Yeah. I didn't want... I would be fine meeting with them. I think it was more so I felt like they were... When we started the conversation, it was more like them trying to get like 20... people to like make sure that like we had meetings after, and so the AI matchmaking didn't work for me. Then I didn't want to go in again and look at the other people that they matched me with. So yeah, you're right. As a dating profile where I was like, no, is it? I don't know which way to swipe. Yeah, but yeah, something more like and I don't know how you get that data. Maybe pull it from other sources. Your LinkedIn profile, your Instagram, if I would have met all of, it was during the division series for baseball, if I would have met all the Mets fans, because I'm a Mets fan, that would have been great.
Cool.
Because we could have like had a little meetup. That's not a good one, actually. Necessarily related to, and there's a few tools that, now that I'm saying that, there's a few tools that do that, that we already had on our show, or we had a show, so. Anyways,
and I think that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a totally good one for sure. One thing I was just going to say, what would get me is getting closer access to speakers, et cetera. Like if there was some like people with star power, some sessions I was really interested in, if I could like get a little bit closer, maybe get some questions in advance to ask them, et cetera, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
But now we're just daydreaming event features again. We need to be talking about ROI.
But I think that's possible. I think there's technology. I've seen it, right? I've seen the technology is there, right? And again, it's not about whether the technology is there. It's about, do we as event organizers have the capacity to do something else? And the answer could be yes or no, but also the question should be, will it give me value back to the organization? For me, what does it do for me? Does it make my people want to come back? Does it make them, make the relationship stronger? Like, we all have hundreds of ideas of things we want to do at an event. Not all of them are things we should do, because if you have, I think John, you said like if a 30% engagement for a mobile app, then do I want to add more features to a mobile app that nobody's going to use?
Right.
No. Or do I want to communicate better, get the app to the adoption of the event app to a point, then add in new things? But I think it's just the thought process, right? Like
Sure.
I do think of matchmaking as dating apps, and I have friends that use dating apps, and the stories I hear, I'm just like, but there's technology out there that can make it better.
Yeah. There's just so many opportunity for it to get better, and we just have to keep talking about it. I think it'll hopefully reach the right people, the decision makers that need to know that things are changing, and they have been changing, and it's time to really look at it differently. So, Vinnu, what's one piece of advice you would give to event organizers to use data effectively?
It's to really have a plan behind it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just not to throw up a reg form and say that's my data collection. I think just being more intentful, have a strategy behind it, but have that strategy connected back to the organization, not just for the event. And I think that's where it's more powerful. And the second piece of that is, and the way to not get overwhelmed with that is just be very specific with that goal, right? You're going to start, it's like brainstorming, right? You're going to have hundreds of ideas, but don't do them all. Pick what's most important, what's most achievable. And, and everybody's going to have a different path for that journey. But I think as planners, we're smart enough to do it. We're not glorified party planners. We are strategists. And I think there's now the resources and technology to make us really powerful.
For real.
I think I've lost track of time, but I think we've gone way over, which is great. But one thing we have to ask, where can our listeners go to learn more about Event ROI?
So look me up online on LinkedIn. It's, I've gone through the certification for LinkedIn, so it's my full name. But if you look up V. Deshetty, you'll definitely find me over there.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and we will
Okay.
have a link to your LinkedIn or any way to get a hold of you in our show notes.
Where will that be, Marissa?
I knew you were going to ask me that. Rizpod.live.
There you
It'll
go.
take you to our Spotify. We are directing everyone to our Spotify because that's our best way to get our data. We're not all over the place. I mean, we are, but we like to use that CTA. So thank you for your valuable insights, your presence. I love hearing about data, even if it's not my most favorite topic to talk about. But I think it all comes together when it comes to events. So I'm happy you were here, Vinnu.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our time together.
Yes,
Great
thank
speaking
you.
with you. Until next
Thank
time,
you.
guys.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching Resilient Events, where co-hosts Marissa and John provide overwhelmed entrepreneurs with a comprehensive strategy for using podcasts, live streams, and events to establish expertise in any industry. With real-life examples and events expertise, they'll help you finish planning and start doing. Visit rizpod.live for show extras and freebies.